My name is Bill Miller. I'm here as a member of the board of AIC, and I think I'm also here because of over 50 years experience in Iran. Everyone here is a veteran, an expert in their subject matter, and I think it'll be an interesting and very different panel in the sense that very different disciplines will be applied. I'm going to ask Stephen Bronner to begin after I've made a few remarks, and then we'll turn to Mr. Pumphrey on the questions of the new world of energy. And finally, the most difficult task, I would say, is the military advisor to CENTCOM, regional expert in a region that has changed completely. So he has no easy task. Like many of you here, I was deeply moved by the Al Jazeera presentations of immolations and Tahrir Square, and of course all the subsequent uprisings throughout the Middle East. The coverage, of course, on Al Jazeera was brilliant and breathtakingly fresh, and gave a sense of immediacy that we have rarely had the chance to witness unless you've been there in a similar situation. Many here have been there in similar situations. I have. I witnessed the Orange Revolution every day and every night in Ukraine. I saw the end of the Soviet Union, and I saw the beginnings of the end of the Shah's regime in Iran. It's very poignant for me to have reached the stage where I can look back at my beginnings with Iran. I first went there in 1959 as a young Foreign Service officer, my first post, and I took a long, leisurely trip through the Middle East. It was possible, and we were even encouraged to do such a thing, first by ship, and then by propellers, planes, and I stopped for a week in Cairo, a week in Beirut, a week in Damascus, and a week in Baghdad. 1959. Those of you who remember, who are that old, will recall that the end of Nasser, the end of Arab socialism, the beginnings of the mess in Iraq with Qasem, Arab socialism in Syria and throughout the Arab world. Iran. Iran, after the restoration of the Shah, after the coup d'etat overthrowing a popularly elected democratic leader, Mohammad Mossadegh. Here was a green Foreign Service officer, literally, who hadn't a clue about the deep effects that rooting out democratic forces in Iran would have after over 50 years. I learned about our policy towards Iran on the ground. First in the most glorious city that I know, Isfahan, where the Governor General, the Ostandar, was the bagman for the coup. And he proudly told me of his exploits in overthrowing Mossadegh. And bit by bit, I understood the realities of what had happened to governance and what we were doing in the pursuit of our objectives, or what I thought were our objectives. And as I quickly learned, our objectives were very confused, contradictory, and driven by forces that had nothing to do with the realities on the ground in Iran. The primary focus was containing the Soviet Union. Iran was a bastion of stability, as Henry Kissinger called it, the linchpin of stability. It was the listening post for radar stations that were watching Soviet missile efforts. The Cold War shaped our attitude towards Iran. And this was at the highest levels, and it even permeated those who had to work on the ground. But anyone who has lived in Iran has to feel the depth of the civilization, the history, the culture, the language, the people, the food, the climate, the way of life. It was utterly different than anything that I had known. And I am sure that everyone who served in the embassies or in the consulates had some of this feeling of depth, of something that was very different, and an attitude towards life itself that had been developed over thousands of years of civilized life. Civilized life meaning war and peace, poverty and wealth, fortune and misfortune, life and death, and perceptions of the purpose of it all, a place of philosophy, of poetry, of history, of science, of achievement and inspiration, but very different than my own. It changed my world. But I come back to the present. The Middle East has changed completely. It's the world turned upside down, as the 18th century philosopher said. Indeed, it has. And we have the task of putting together the pieces that remain in the rubble. Our security structures have collapsed. Who is at work in Libya? NATO. Was that the NATO mission at the conception of NATO? What was the American role? How do human rights fit in? What kind of Middle East do we want? Do the people of the region want? Those people on Tahrir Square, the fellow who said, I'm free, I'm a free Egyptian. That's a power, the power of empowerment. The chance is there, and the act of creation is underway. There are three great powers in the Middle East now: Egypt, Turkey, and Iran. By definition of size, population, military weight, the power of their civilizations, the weight of their history, the depth of their poetry and philosophy, their achievements. We are the great outside power still, but we don't have a structure any longer. It has collapsed, or at a minimum is severely in disarray. We have to put the pieces together again. It has often been said that there could be no more diverse entities in a group like Turkey, Iran, and Egypt. They have very different histories, even though they're neighbors. They have different cultures. They see the world differently. But we see the world differently than most people, and we think we can get along with almost anyone. So our task is to put it together again and to recognize in the first instance that it has fallen apart. Cento, who remembers Cento? Historians. It's no longer a valid idea, although the historical experience is worth looking at. Ottoman Empire, that doesn't apply. Persian Empire, no. NATO, no. So something new has to be created, and it has to come out of those people who were in the street, who have been newly empowered. Whether it's Tahrir Square or in the heart of Damascus, in Jordan, even in Turkey, and Iran. Iran itself prides its way of thinking, saying that we have been in continuous revolution since 1890. We are not yet finished. Anyone who's gone to Iran recently knows that this is true. As Americans, our revolution isn't finished either. We have a remarkable president who represents a big step in our revolution, but it's not over. So we have work to do. And I would say that the examples of the nations who are involved and what they have experienced in their separate uprisings, the empowerment of their people by enabling them to come on the street and to make sacrifices for what they think is their country. This is the essence of the new order. The Iranian Revolution empowered the mass, without question. They have a way to go, and they know it. And they're very good at it. And they're an example to others in ways that are very different in each country. But There's a common heritage, which is that the masses have said we want a share in governance. We want to live in a decent way. We want rule of law. We want fairness and social equity. We have been oppressed, and we want to get rid of those who have oppressed us. And they have done that. So the task is how to deal with that phenomenon, that huge change. I want to turn first for a philosophical structure, and then turn to one of the great issues is the new energy policies that are possible, given the experience of the past and the recent past. And finally, the challenges for security, which are very different than they were a year ago. So thank you.